All right. Hey, Zabi.
Hey Nick,
We should be live now. Can you hear me well?
absolutely. All is
Okay,
fine.
good. Let's start then. Hello, everybody, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. In the next 40 minutes or so, we will explore how to migrate SQL objects and Power BI reports from on-prem to the Azure cloud. Now, as part of our presentation, we will show you a couple of actual solutions that we had used to solve two real life issues that we had faced during one of our recent migration projects. All right, so a few housekeeping items before we start. There's a chat on the right hand side of your window. Please leave your comments and questions, and after the presentation, we will look at the questions and have a separate discussion. Now, before we start, a few words about us. Now, let me share actually our slides. I'm going to do it like this. All right. So, we are from Centida, and Centida is a boutique firm specializing in management consulting, financial planning, and operations. What makes us special is that we combine the business side of things in technical expertise in data analytics and data engineering. I am Nick Pavlov, a project manager and data analyst. And when working with Power BI in the past, I have mostly been in the front end of the things, building reports, consuming them without having to think too much about the data source and migration. So that's why today I am joined with Zabi Tamás, a seasoned data solutions engineer. Zabi, why don't you give us a quick introduction and then I can continue?
Hi Nick, yes, thank you very much. It's interesting that you mentioned that you were mostly in the front end because I have been mostly in the back end for the last 17 years. I started it in finance, working with SQL Server and BI solutions. Then I moved to the programming industry, and I spent 5 years and did some programming in .NET and C Sharp in various domains from telco to delivery, many things. Then, like 6, 7 years ago, I switched back to BI, especially to Power BI, with some write back. And now here I am with Centida and providing consultancy for your clients and for our clients.
Perfect, perfect. Now, before we start, right, let me quickly give you the context. Now, although the industry in general is rapidly moving to the cloud, according to Gartner, at least last year, about 30 to 40% of companies, and I would say that probably more so in European Union than in the rest of the world, are still, stick with the on-prem systems. And these organizations have significant investments in legacy infrastructure and prefer on-prem for strict regulations, data residency laws, or simply because they like having full control of the data. Now, the risks of cloud migration, such as potential data breaches or compliance issues in some countries, right, can seem overwhelming when you're dealing with systems that have been fine-tuned over the years or sometimes even decades. Now, at the same time, the overall trend is clear. More companies are making the move to the cloud, and why are they doing that? Because obviously the cloud has uh, a few very strong benefits. Not a few, but quite a lot. First of all, I mean we're talking about flexibility and scalability. Traditional on-prem systems just simply cannot match that. You can quickly ramp up your resources during busy periods and scale back down when things slow down, which means you only pay what you have used, right? So that's very cost effective. Plus, cloud platforms come with integrated analytics and AI tools that provide deeper insights into your data, making your environment more dynamic. Um, so let's jump into the actual migration process. And Zabi here, um, I'd like to invite you and ask, what if you could walk us through all the stages of a migration process and explain what are the key action items in each stage.
Absolutely, absolutely. So a migration is really like a story for me because it has its introduction, then it has its own chapters with some dramas, with some resolutions, and hopefully at the very end we have a happy ending. The way I'm doing migration projects is that I always start with a proper assessment. And by the way, I just want to note here that I'm going to show you some technical stuff as well. So those who are coming from the SQL and Power BI world, maybe they will find it interesting. If you're not from that area, then don't worry. So assessment is always the first step. How do we do that? So what kind of objects, what kind of territories we need to consider when we have a migration, especially with BI environments? So of course, you have SQL databases, SQL warehouses, right? Because that environment is going to serve the data for your semantic models, for your BI environments. Between those two or between databases, probably you will have ETL processes, SSIS packages, right? So that should be also considered. And finally, the last element that should be considered is the Power BI reports themselves, their visualization, right? And after the very end, you need to monitor the newly built system, make some slight tunings based on the workload and the change of the user interaction because it is going to be different. For instance, if you had an on-premise BI environment, your end users will going to interact with that cloud environment differently, and so on and so on and so on. But there is a story, and we can clearly identify that we need to assess, we need to deal with SQL objects, we need to take care of the SSIS packages and the Power BI datasets, right? So the very first step, the assessment. Let me show you some example here. How am I doing it? And it's not rocket science. It's really a very simple thing. How do I prepare for a migration project? So let me share my screen and let me know, Nick, if that is visible. And there you go. So what I do first, I assess the backend, the SQL structure. I need to take a catalog about the tables in questions, the indexes in questions, views, stored procedures, triggers, all those objects which are utilized in the BI system. Why? Why is it important? Of course, first of all, you need to precisely assess what is the Azure tier level that you are going to use, right? Second, you need to take into consideration the size of the data that is going to be moved between the on-prem and the cloud environment. So the migration time, the downtime, especially if you are a larger company and you have a continuously online business. And third, why it's very important, because during this assessment, you can find certain type of objects which are not supported in the cloud or not intuitively is going to work in the cloud environment. Just to quickly show you what I did. And in order to get these data from your database, you can rely on ChatGPT or an AI tool. You can ask the tool to please generate me some SQL scripts, which is going to list out the tables in my database with some statistic information like row count or the size of the log files or the underlying data file and so on. So for instance, in this case, as you can see, we have some tables in my first sheet. Where I can see how many rows do I have in tables. And one additional good thing, why you should do it, is because during the migration you can identify certain tables that are not needed to be migrated because those are obsolete. The end user will not need it, and so on. If you come to the indexes, if you list out the indexes in your underlying database, in this case, for us, it was very valuable because clustered column store indexes were used in certain tables, which is, at least it was a couple of months ago, it was not supported in the whole Azure SQL environment, only starting from S3 if you take the standard tiers. So that gave us a very good indication that what is the minimum needed in terms of Azure SQL, and that gave also a good indication for the Azure costs for the client, right? So that's why listing out indexes is also important. If we're moving out to views, here we can find certain various things. For instance, object references in the from clauses are also stating out the database name, which in Azure SQL is not supported. So you can also assess and prepare in your head that you will need to do some cleanup also in the view definitions, not just simply migrate it, right? If we move to stored procedures, here you can also find certain dependencies. For instance, it can turn out that in your on-premise environment, you are digesting CSV files or flat files for a certain reason. That will also give you a good indication that you will need to deal with file storage in your cloud. You also need to rethink the way you are going to process those files, and also how the other systems which are providing those files as input for the database, because maybe then you will need to also fine-tune and rethink those processes that can have other implications in the project, in the client. And what in this case was interesting and special is two things. First of all, link servers, which is also not supported in Azure SQL, but there is, of course, a solution that can help you overcome that blockage. And the other thing is that in this particular example, there were analysis services cubes serving the Power BI environment. And inside some stored procedures, those analysis services cubes, those tabular models were queried through link servers in order to fetch some result of some measure calculations, which were later used in finance department for planning and forecasting and so on. So as I said, link server is also not supported. So we had to find a way how we can rethink and integrate this kind of fetching the data of a semantic layer, right? And of course, you should also take a look on what kind of triggers you would have, for instance. And if you have multiple databases, then it's also important to list those objects out for you. So this is how I would start. This then it's going to give me a good overview on how many objects will I need to modify or migrate, how many effort and time will be needed, to deliver that project and assess the required efforts. And as I said, feel free to use the available AI tools to help you with that. What I used to migrate the data itself, it was the Microsoft Data Migration Assistant. It's a good tool. It can really help you that, but of course, if you have other tools in your hand, feel free to use it. And I said at the very beginning that every step has a drama and a solution. In my story, I made a mistake here at the very beginning because I forgot to check what was the collation of the on-prem databases. And in Azure SQL, the collation cannot be changed after you have created the database, right? And it turned out that that is an issue. So during the data copy mechanism, after several hours, I believe it was 5 or 6, the pipeline failed, and it took a couple of minutes to research that unfortunately we can't do it. Luckily, it was at the very beginning, it turned out, so we had to recreate the databases in Azure with the right collation. So don't forget that. Always check it. Now, after the, it was a big lesson. Now, when the SQL migration, the data migration happened, what will you usually do? Validate the data, right? Now, how can you validate the data? That's just a quick tip because many people, let me share my screen back. Actually, I won't turn my sharing off when I finished. Is that usually people just simply doing a check on the row counts, right? So what was in the what was in the on-premise environment now? What has been migrated? And if the row count matches, then we are good. Well, not always, because one of my friends said, and I think it's true. I learned this again today morning before this webinar. Is that it's a funny thing that probably the devil itself invented the IT, because yes, it resolves problems and help you in life, but it also creates a lot of headaches and tons of problems. So just always keep that in mind. So don't rely on simply counting the rows. Instead, what I offer you and what we used with great success is to simply use a very straightforward function, which is called the checksum, together with the checksum aggregate. You can basically use this function on all the columns which present in the table. And of course, this would be evaluated for each row in a table. That's not what we want. We want to have a checksum of the individual checksums. So at the end, what you will have is a list of tables, how many rows you had in the on-prem environment, in the cloud environment, and you can just simply compare the checksums, and that's it.
So you manually compare what you had and what you have in the cloud, basically to make sure that you have exact same number.
Yeah, I did manually, but nowadays probably I would use some AI tool. I mean, yeah, with Python code to connect both data sources, execute these scripts, compare the checksums, and give me a report that how it went. That's for sure. One thing here, which it was also a lesson for me, if you have an auto increment field, or most likely like a timestamp or a created date type of field, then you don't want to use this select star. Anyway, it's a bad practice, I know, but don't use this select star, because those timestamps can be reinitialized during the data copy, right? So in that case, the date time will be different in the cloud and can be different in the cloud and in the on-prem. In that case, you would have a different checksum. If you have columns like that, just simply list out those columns which really matter, right? Because we did not consider that. I was lazy, so I used the star. And of course, it took like maybe an hour to figure out that no, it was actually correct. So it was also a lesson. So I think,
once that is done, what do you do? Like, what do you do next? So you did assessment planning, you counted all of the objects, you compared them. So what's the next step then?
next step is really the migration itself. So first of all, those entities, and let me rely on the assessment Excel. So those entities where I did not find any problem. So tables which supported data types are supported in both places, or indexes, then I migrated. I focus on those objects which needs some development. For instance, in a case of use where there were references to other databases, or it was referencing the same database, I had to, fine tune it and make the syntax compatible with the Azure cloud. The more complex cases, for instance, when a file system was referenced or another database was referenced, external tables have been created in the database to also maintain this connection between these two entities. And also, in many cases, additional configuration is needed both in the Azure infrastructure and on the SQL Server. For instance, in order for the SQL Server can access a Power BI dataset, database scope credentials must be created, managed identities must be set up correctly. If you will be using ADF pipelines, which we will discuss in a minute, then certain configurations will need to be done with them. But first, I really want to have the foundations. And what are the foundations? Basically, those are the row tables. Those are having the data, right? Everything else, so sort procedures, views, triggers, are not just, but those are layers on top of my raw data, right? If my data is in place, I can start working on these other objects, and then I can verify if the modified or the cloud compatible objects are now in sync, are producing the same result as the on-prem environment. And when those are ready, we verified it, then we can say that, okay, we are done with the SQL Server, SQL objects migration to the cloud. And then we can move on and basically, can you show us the PPT, Nick? I'm not sure how it is done. Do I need to stop
no
my...
problem. Sure.
Okay.
So the SQL objects is the next slide. Or ETL.
ETL. Yeah,
ETL.
yeah.
SSIS
ETL.
packages, yes.
SSIS packages. Oh, I remember when 15 years ago I first met with SSIS. First, I loved it. Then, as I started to hate it because I was so much struggling with the code page incompatibility when we started to process flat files, and it was troublesome. It was troublesome, but I liked it because these arrows, connecting the dots, really see how the data is flowing. It was like a game for me then. Yeah. Now, of course, in many environments you will have some ETL process, right? Whether it's SSIS or some other tools. Maybe it's not required to migrate it. Maybe it is. In terms of SSIS, what we have done in this particular project, we were, let's say, lucky because there were not so many, and those were not really complex. So the decision was together with the client, since their policy was that they really wanted to shift completely to the cloud, right? So then we proposed that, okay, let's convert or recode, rewrite the SSIS packages into Azure Data Factory, because it really supports all those control flow type of actions. It has the right data connectors. This particular client was using or was getting data from SAP. And we had a bunch of SQL jobs which were getting the data from SAP, was creating some transformations on the data, loading into the staging environment, then to the other database which was feeding the Power BI data, the Azure, the analysis services models. So we decided to rewrite all the SSIS packages. We did that. It was a very great success. Now the not end users, the IT guys there are happy to use it because the web UI is much more convenient to use compared to what was Visual Studio. It's straightforward. There are a bunch of materials available that you can use and learn from, and it was a good success. My recommendation is that if you're moving to the cloud completely, probably it's worth to do it because anyways, most likely that is going to be the future. But if you have complex SSIS packages or you have many, like, I don't know, more than 50 or 100, then it's also a possibility that you fire up a virtual machine in Azure. You install there a SQL server with integration services. You push all your packages there because the ADF can also, the Azure Data Factory can also call SSIS packages from a virtual machine, or you can still continue to execute those packages inside the VM. And now you are also in the cloud. So it's up to your choice. It's up to your choice. The lesson that we have learned here is, of course, cost is very important everywhere in life, but also in the cloud. So in terms of Azure SQL database costs, it was not under a heavy workload, because mostly these databasing questions were really serving data for the BI environment, and that was loaded only once a day. Or twice a day. During the daytime, the workload was very, very little. So maybe some folks on the controlling department was doing some custom queries, to support the decision makers. So we decided that during those downtimes, we don't want to have a high tier allocated to SQL Server. But when the data is loaded, it was crucial that it executes fast, right? So for that, we have created in Azure Data Factory a scale-up activity. You can find patterns in the internet. It's also ChatGPT can help. It's really working. So before the pipeline activities executes, the Azure SQL Elastic Pool, actually, because we have multiple databases and we used Elastic Pools. That Elastic Pool is scaled up, and when everything is finished, or if there was an error and the whole process halted in one of the steps, we scale it down. So that was very good. One thing that we learned is that in order for the ADF to really work this way, we had to create custom roles in Azure Entra, because the ADF pipeline is using the Elastic Pool operation results / read permission level in order to check whether the scale up event has finished or not. And before that, actually the scale up operation was failing because it was not able to get its current status. So it was like really like what is happening here? That was the big lesson, but it's very good for cost optimization. I highly recommend to do it. Yeah.
Now let's talk about Power BI reports. So once
Power
all of that is
BI
done,
report.
yeah.
Power BI reports. Those are special ones because Power BI reports, we can have import modes, imported models, and direct query models, right? Then we have in the cloud Power BI dataset, but in on-prem, we have analysis services models in tabular mode, right? They behaving the same, they are almost exactly the same, but there are some slight differences. So, and of course, not to mention the security. So in on-premise environment, most likely you will have this machine name / username type of user principal name, but in the cloud you have the email address format, right? So when it comes to role migration, that's also an interesting thing. So here, I was thinking that what we could show that it's interesting, so I brought some stuff here. So let me share my screen again. And entire screen, and this is the correct, I hope. Yes, I think so. So first lesson was learned. What you see here, it's an query in a Power BI report, and this table was in direct query mode. This here is the generated SQL statement by Power BI itself. And this was actually the first report that we have migrated, so we were lucky. Yes, it's big, but it's not the funny thing here. The funny thing is that it has an unpivot operator inside, and then the result of that unpivot operator is joined on another table. What was very, very frustrating is that for some reason, it's exactly the same query on exactly the same database correlation behaved or executed differently by an on-prem SQL server and an Azure SQL server. In Azure SQL, this was failing and it was complaining about correlation issues. It took a couple of, it took many effort to reverse engineer what was happening here, because yes, we found the issue that it was the join condition. Yes, if I was to write by hand this query, I would just put here the collation so that the join will be executing correctly. But of course, you can't modify a query which is generated by Power BI. So what we have come up with is that in this mQuery transformation, we forced the Power Query to, and it's not a good practice, because if you have a very large table, probably you don't want to do that. But in our case, it was good enough, you know. So what we did is that before the join happens in Power Query, so before the join is basically created during the query unfold event, we force the engine to load the table in memory with this table transform columns operator, because this will basically force, what does this function do? It will iterate over each row and each column in the table. It will do a simple transformation, nothing more, just it converts to text with US encoding. It's not what is important. What is important is that you can find some very nice tricks in Power Query which can enforce the whole query execution to be partially unfolded onto your backend, which means that if you encounter some unexplainable incompatibility between executed direct queries on-prem and in the cloud, you should probably go to your mQuery and see where you can tackle and where you can break the chain, so that those parts which can be still pushed down to your SQL can be executed by SQL, and those parts where it is breaking, you probably should rely on Power BI itself, right? Now, what other challenges might come? And of course, this is also a real example. You are moving from on-prem to cloud, right? On-prem, the on-prem models are connected to an on-prem analysis services model. If you have that report and you take that and you publish it to Power BI service, and you also publish the model, you need to point that report to your cloud model, right? So you need to change the connection, per se, in your model. But if you have like 300 reports, probably you don't want to do it manually, hand by hand, right? At all. So what I highly encourage people to use, and don't be afraid of, is the Power BI API, the rebind method. With that rebind method, and we have a script here, with that rebind method, basically you can iterate over a list of reports and you can reconnect those to your newly published cloud model, semantic model, which saves you a lot of time. However, it will come with a bad thing, is that after you, probably many people saw this. So when you modify a Power BI dataset via tabular editor or SSRS, so basically when you are using the XMLA endpoints, after that, your Power BI report will become not, you won't be able to download it, right? This is frustrating, especially for end users who are very accustomed to use Power BI Desktop as a modeling tool as well, creating new measurement relationships whatsoever. So that was a headache, and if you use this rebind function, then, am I sharing my screen? Yes, okay.
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me add your screen here.
Okay, thank you. So this was a rebind API. If you use this, then your report will not be downloadable again. But there is a small trick that you can use, and this is not my stuff. Nick, who is the guy? Matthias?
Yes, his name is Matthias Thierbach.
Yeah. So credits to
Shout out,
him.
shout out to
Yeah,
Matthias. Yeah.
to Matthias, because he created this PBI tools, which basically gives you the flexibility to manipulate the internal structure of a PBIX file,
Mhm.
both the model definition, the probably you're familiar with the XMLA format, the JSON. I'm going to show you in just a second, but also the structure of your report itself. Here in this blog, he is basically, and also another guy explaining that what can you do, actually this is the one, what can you do if you modify the Power BI report in the cloud and
Oh, that's Kurt, Data Goblin.
yeah, that's the other guy. So this is the
Yeah.
Matthias who invented the tool. Curtis created this article, which we used for a foundation, what we did. So basically, if you have a Power data set, you modified it with Tabular Editor, you can't download it. If you use this approach, you will be able to download it. But here, as it says, doesn't work with AAS datasets, but it does work with a small trick. So let me just quickly show you why. So, and this is where the analysis services model definition differs from the Power BI dataset. So here, as you can see, and this is an analysis services model. Here we have a section at the very beginning where the data sources are defined. And in the table definitions under the partitions, actually it is referencing that data source as it was like a pointer or a variable. And this is not supported in a Power BI dataset because simply this section doesn't exist. So if you want your migrated analysis services model, which was rebinded to a cloud Power BI dataset, therefore you can't download it, but you still want your end users to be downloaded and make changes, here what you do. You connect with Tabular Editor to your Power BI dataset. You save your model bin file into a folder, right? Then you follow these steps, which these guys are very nicely writing down. So basically, you will have a blank PBIX file. In that blank PBIX file, you will paste this file in the right place, and you will make a very small modification. So in your XMLA model, you will get rid of this section completely, the data sources section, absolutely completely. And you just simply change the partition definitions M expression so that it will not reference the name of the data source, but rather than it will really point to the exact SQL database that it's getting the data from and also the table. Then you recompile the package to a PBIT file, you open it, it will reload the data, you can publish it into the cloud, and then you will be able to download the report. That's it. And then you are done. So that was a big lesson for us and also a requirement because I don't know how it is nowadays, but back then the Visual Studio was could be only used for analysis, so on-prem tabular models authoring, and they didn't want to use tabular editor, so they are very accustomed, especially the business users in finance, to use Power BI Desktop as an authoring tool. So we find this approach to use Matthias tools and approach, and also some custom thinking for this particular Azure one. And one final lesson that I would like to share, and I think our time is almost up, and those are the most interesting thing or most valuable lesson, is that during the role migration, one day before go live, we have noticed that yes, those maybe more than 200 rows were migrated with the right usernames to the right groups, and so on. But it turned out that the filter expressions were not migrated at all, which means why it's a problem, because no matter in what row you are, you will be able to see everything and everyone's data, right? That's really not good. It's a big no-no, and it was a terrifying situation, because redoing the migration of the 250 rows, it probably would have lasted 2 days or more than 1 day for sure. So what we did is we turned to ChatGPT, and I asked him if he could help. And we came up together with a very nice PowerShell script. If you want, Nick, you can share my screen back, and we can also provide this script for the end users. Basically, with the help of ChatGPT, we have created a script which is connecting to an on-premise tabular cube. It is extracting all the rows in that cube. Within the rows, the filter expressions on the tables, it's get that information, then it is connecting to a Power BI premium dataset to the right model, and it is simply redeploying the filter expressions for those tables. It's a simple one, it's quickly executable and customizable, really just matter of small effort to really fine-tune and augment it for your needs. So these lessons that we have learned, and luckily we were able to do this quick fix, this fire extinguishing process within 4 hours instead of 16 or 12 at least. So it was really a lifesaver prior to 1 day of go live. So it was lucky. And as I said, migration is a story. We had at the very beginning as an introduction that we assessed what do we need to do, what are the key objects that needs to be migrated, where we need to be cautious. We had some dramas, we have found some resolutions for the problems, and at the end the client was very satisfied. And why it is making me proud is that I remember that at the very beginning the client was not suspicious, I don't know what is the word, very reluctant, to do this whole thing, because, now move to the cloud, we have our own server room where we have installed these nice extinguisher systems. There are the machines which I can see. I don't know what is going to happen with my data what will happen with my data during the process. But as we made progress, and the client was involved in the whole process in every stage. So when we have found that, okay, in order for this view to work, we will need to make these changes. It will make an effect on this process. This is how you would need to do. Please have a look at the checksum information so that we can assure you that your right data is now in the cloud. So the client was involved, and constantly we were reporting to them. And at the end, they were very satisfied, and now they are happily using the cloud. They are doing their own ADF packages, for instance. Now they are using tabular editor, and so on. So it was a success.
Incredible. And this goes back to what I kind of mentioned in today or previous conversations we had, how the data culture within a company should shift before you decide to do a migration. Because at the end of the day, yes, I said that 30% of companies are still on-prem, but this number, I'm guessing is going to go, is going to be less and less companies being on-prem. Everyone will be moving to the cloud eventually. This is the trend with AI and new advanced analytics tools. This is going to be even more important. So more companies will be moving in. So these were some good, important lessons. And obviously, we can talk about migration for another hour at least, right? Because there's a lot more topics we could expand on, like the data warehouse. Are you going to put it in the bronze layer, silver, gold, all of that, right? But for the sake of our time, I suggest that we go to questions. Okay. So one question we have is, in your experience, how unique do you think each migration project is? Like, in other words, is it possible to use a certain out of the box tools which do end to end migration, at
Mhm.
least for backend databases, or maybe like a create a script which does all of that?
Mhm. Yeah, the answer is that yes and no, because it really depends your database structure, how complex it is. If you have very straightforward store procedures, nothing fancy, no link server references that I mentioned at the very beginning, I
Hmm.
really can recommend the Microsoft Migration Assistant. It can do its job. I mean,
Okay.
if you don't have terabytes of data, so you're a mid-sized business, you can go with that. Second, you can look for internet. There are a bunch of tools that has migration, but also, so if you are a tech guy, you can use ChatGPT. I mean, it can do very stupid things, but also marvelous things.
Yeah.
Just be careful with it,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but it can help you.
Yeah. And another question we have is, does Microsoft provide any standard migration tools for Power BI, or that is always a manual process where we have to go deep into Power Query, XMLA definitions, etc.?
That I don't know, to be honest. That I don't know. Back that time, we have not found any tool, at least which was for free. So that's why we decided to go with this way. And remember, the only reason why we had to tamper with the XMLA files is because we wanted to provide the end users this downloadability function, basically. Because if
Hmm.
that was not necessary, really what we have done, the reports, the models were migrated there simply by using an ALM toolkit or by
Right.
just simply deploying it with SSDT, and we use the rebind API just to save time.
Okay.
That was it.
And I have my own personal question, last question here. So obviously we don't know like what exactly is going to happen, but if you had a crystal ball, what do you think? I mean, we talked about ChatGPT, other AI tools. Like, what do you think could be in the next year or three, maybe, or even 5 years from now? How are we going to do migration? How these tools are going to help us? What do you expect or feel like should be there or will be there?
Mhm. Well, since AI is learning and it's also digesting every written and not just written materials from the internet, what I'm hoping is that maybe there will be not boxed solutions for everything, because every
Hmm.
data warehouse and infrastructure is somewhat different. But I am expecting that we have a solution that is going to be able to do the migration, a big chunk of the migration, and a smaller remaining part, which now really needs manual intervention, a lot of coding, a lot of researching, in GitHub and Stack Overflow and any places how to do those nitty things. For that portion, what I expect is that an AI assistant which can tap into your data structure, not your data itself, because for
Hmm.
this, the data structure, understanding the data structure is enough. And it could help you really finalize those last portions, which really is needed
Right.
to say that we are done with the migration.
Fine tune it. And I mean, everyone's excited about AI and all the new tools, but at the end of the day, I mean, these tools are only going to be as good as the backend, right? So the data source, I mean, we should be able to. Um, what I'm trying to say is the migrations will be happening a lot more. Companies that are left out, still on-prem, I'm guessing will be moving to the cloud more. So this will become an important task, right? An important project. So if your company is looking to migrate, if you're still on premises and you're looking to migrate, thinking about that from on-prem environment to the cloud, and you need expert advice and consulting, we're here to help. Zabi, other consultants that we have can help you with years of technical experience and deep understanding of cloud and on-prem challenges. We're here to provide tailored solutions that can meet your needs. Here's our contact information. Thanks for tuning in. And Zabi, big thank you for coming in, for showing us all the tricks that that you have learned, and it was a good technical deep dive.
Thank you, Nick. It was nice to be here. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks for
If
the
you have
audience.
any more questions, people, ask us, write us. We are here one click away. Thank you and have a great day. All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.